Hello and welcome. Find a comfortable spot, perhaps with a warm drink, and allow the worries and noises of your day to begin to fade. Tonight, we are going to journey back in time, not to the clash of swords or the grand halls of kings, but to a quieter, more profound revolution, one that took place in the mind of a single patient observer. We're going to explore the thoughts of a man who changed the world, not with force, but by looking closer, by wondering about the endless, beautiful forms of life that teem all around us. We begin our journey with the words of Charles Darwin and the very first chapter of his incredible, world-altering book on the origin of species. So take a deep, slow breath. Let your shoulders relax, and let's begin our story in a world brimming with quiet mystery. The world of variation. Imagine, if you will, a quiet English study, nestled in the green Kent countryside. Rain patters softly against the window pane, a gentle rhythm against the silence. A man, his brow furrowed in deep and persistent thought, sits surrounded by books and papers, jars of specimens, and the carefully preserved memories of a long voyage. This is Charles Darwin. For years, he travelled the globe as a naturalist aboard a ship named the Beagle, and what he saw, particularly in the wild, untouched landscapes of South America, planted the seed of a question in his mind. It was a question so immense, so fundamental, that one of his heroes had called it the mystery of mysteries. Where do all the species of the world truly come from? He did not rush for an answer. That was not his way. On his return home for 5 long years, he patiently gathered facts, filling notebook after notebook with observations, questions, and reflections. He felt the immense weight of the idea taking shape in his mind, knowing it might shake the very foundations of how humanity saw itself and its place in the world. He knew he could not be hasty. His work was a great puzzle, and he felt that the first, most important piece was not to be found in the wild, untamed jungle, but somewhere much, much closer to home, in our gardens, on our farms, and inside our pigeon coops. He decided to begin his grand exploration not with the exotic, but with the familiar. He would study the creatures and plants we have lived alongside for millennia, our domesticated animals and our cultivated plants. For in their humble story, in their incredible diversity, he believed, lay the clue to all the others. He begins his book with a simple yet profound observation. When we look at the plants in our gardens or the animals on our farms, we are surrounded by an almost endless variety. Think of dogs, from the towering, gentle Great Dane to the tiny, trembling Chihuahua. Or think of the stunning and endless array of roses, each with a different shade of color, a different perfume, a different number of petals. Darwin noted that these domesticated beings generally differ from one another far more than their wild relatives do. Why should this be? He suspected it was because we, as humans, have taken them from their natural, more uniform conditions and raised them under our own varied and ever-changing care. Perhaps, he mused, it's the excess of food, the comfort and steady protection we provide, that unlocks this incredible, latent potential to change. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. An animal or a plant must be exposed to these new conditions for several generations before we can see any real, appreciable change. But once that process of variation begins, it seems it can continue for a very, very long time. Our oldest and most trusted crops, like wheat, still surprise us by yielding new varieties. Our most anciently tamed animal companions, like dogs and cattle, are still capable of rapid improvement and modification. It is as if life, under the patient hand of man, becomes plastic, soft, and ready to be molded. But what is the spark that ignites this fire of change? Where and when does this variation begin? Darwin pondered this question deeply. Is it something that happens to the tiny embryo as it develops? Or does its origin lie even further back, at the very moment of conception? He came to suspect that the most frequent cause of this wonderful variability was that the very reproductive elements of the parents, the pollen of the flower, the ovules of the plant, the reproductive cells of the animal, were themselves affected by their new and altered conditions of life. He pointed out how difficult it often is to get wild animals to breed in captivity. We can tame them, make them comfortable and healthy, and yet their fundamental ability to reproduce is often seriously and mysteriously affected. Think of the magnificent birds of prey that, even in the best of circumstances, rarely lay fertile eggs in confinement, or the exotic plants which, though they grow strong and healthy in a greenhouse, produce pollen that is utterly worthless, just like that of a sterile hybrid. This profound sensitivity, Darwin argued, is the key. The reproductive system seems to be more susceptible to change than any other part of an organism. So, when it does manage to work under these new, unnatural conditions, it doesn't always work with perfect regularity. It acts with a slight tremor, a slight uncertainty, and the result is offspring that are not perfect copies of their parents. The result is variation. It is a beautiful and quiet paradox. The very same influence which can lead to sterility in some is the very source of the wonderful and beautiful variety we see in others. Of course, not every new quirk is passed down, but the sheer number and diversity of traits that can be inherited is seemingly endless, from the slightest difference in color to the most significant change in structure. Every breeder knows this in their bones. Their fundamental belief is simple: like produces like. And yet, the laws of inheritance are a quiet mystery. Why does a child sometimes seem to skip a generation and resemble a grandparent more than a parent? Why is a specific trait passed from a father to his sons, but not his daughters? Darwin didn't have all the answers, but he observed an important and subtle rule. At whatever period of life a new peculiarity first appears in the parent, it tends to reappear in the offspring at a corresponding age. The unique horns of certain cattle breeds, or the particular stages of a silkworm's life. These traits appear in the young when they reach that same stage of maturity. This simple rule, he believed, was of the very highest importance for understanding the development of all life on Earth. Darwin also saw, with his naturalist's eye, that a living being is not a collection of separate parts, but a web of intricate and mysterious connections. A change in one part of an organism often leads to completely unexpected changes in another. He called this principle the correlation of growth. He pointed his readers to the curious and well-known fact that cats with pure white fur and blue eyes are almost always deaf, or that hairless dogs often have imperfect teeth. With his beloved pigeons, he noted that the breeds with feathered feet also had a thin layer of skin between their outer toes, and that pigeons with very short beaks tended to have very small feet. It's a mysterious and subtle law of nature. If a breeder patiently selects for one single desired peculiarity, they will almost certainly, without meaning to, modify other parts of the animal's body at the same time. It's as if the blueprint of the body has its own deep and hidden rules, and changing one part of the plan forces adjustments elsewhere. He also gave weight to the quiet but powerful influence of habit, or what he called use and disuse. He carefully measured the bones of the domestic duck, which flies much less and walks more than its wild ancestor. He found that its wing bones were lighter and its leg bones were heavier in proportion to the rest of its skeleton. He pointed to the greatly developed udders in cows and goats in countries where they are habitually milked for generations, a powerful example of how use can shape the body. It seemed that the very way an animal lived its life day after day could, over many generations, be written into its very bones, its very being. These laws, the laws of reproduction, of inheritance, of interconnected growth, of habit, all weave together to create what Darwin called the infinitely complex and diversified world of variation that we see in our domesticated species. The whole organization of a being becomes, in his words, plastic, gently bending and departing from its parental type in small ways. This, Darwin realized, was the raw material for change. But raw material needs a force to shape it. And that force, he argued, was man himself. To truly understand this power of shaping, Darwin knew he needed to look beyond generalities and study one special group in incredible, meticulous detail. He chose pigeons. And so, in his home in the English countryside, he began to keep them. He kept every breed he could purchase or obtain, from the regal English carrier to the charming short-faced tumbler. He joined 2 of the London pigeon clubs, speaking with the most respected fanciers, and he received skins of exotic breeds from as far away as India and Persia. And the diversity he found among these birds was, in his own word, astonishing. Just imagine for a moment these incredible birds. The carrier, with its wonderfully elongated beak and the fleshy, wrinkled skin that develops around its head. The short-faced tumbler, with a delicate beak that looks almost like that of a finch. The runt, a bird of immense and heavy size. The pouter, with its marvelously elongated body and its enormously developed crop, which it inflates with a comical pride. The Jacobin, with a soft hood of reversed feathers that frames its neck. And the fantail, a bird of pure elegance, which carries not the normal 12 or 14 feathers in its tail, but 30 or even 40, fanned out so beautifully that its head and tail can touch. These differences were not just superficial. Darwin carefully examined their skeletons and found that the bones of the face, the shape of the jaw, the number of vertebrae, the structure of the breastbone, all of these varied enormously from breed to breed. He was utterly convinced that if you showed this collection of birds to a skilled ornithologist and claimed they were wild species, they would be ranked not just as different species, but in some cases as entirely different genera. And yet, Darwin came to believe a profound and simple truth, one that even many naturalists of his day found hard to accept. All of these wildly different birds, every last one, descended from a single common ancestor, the humble wild rock pigeon that nests on sea cliffs. How could this be possible? He laid out his reasons with the calm patience of a detective. First, if they all came from 7 or 8 different wild parent stocks, as some believed, then where were those wild stocks now? Surely such remarkable and distinct birds wouldn't have just vanished from the wild without a single trace, completely unknown to science. Furthermore, it is incredibly difficult to get wild animals to breed in captivity, yet this theory required that ancient, half-civilized man had somehow managed to thoroughly tame 7 or 8 separate and highly unusual species of pigeon. But his most powerful and elegant argument came from the simple matter of color. The wild rock pigeon has a very specific and unique set of markings: a slaty blue color, a white patch on his rump, 2 distinct black bars on his wings, and a dark bar at the end of his tail. These marks do not occur altogether in any other wild pigeon species in the entire world. And yet, in every single one of the domestic breeds, no matter how different they looked or how purely they were bred, these ancestral markings would sometimes, as if by magic, reappear perfectly. Even more amazing, he conducted his own experiments. When he crossed 2 birds from completely different and purebred stocks, say a pure white fantail and a pure black barb, their mongrel offspring, after a generation or 2, could suddenly produce a grandchild that was a perfect, beautiful, living image of the wild rock pigeon. This principle of reversion to a long-lost ancestral character was powerful and undeniable evidence that all these different streams of life flowed from a single, common source. The pigeons, Darwin argued with quiet confidence, revealed the key. The secret to their incredible transformation was not some hidden magic within the birds themselves, but in the simple, steady, and cumulative power of human choice. This power is what he called selection. Nature, he wrote, gives the successive variations, but a man adds them up in certain directions useful to him. In this sense, Darwin proposed, man may be said to make for himself useful breeds. This isn't a hypothetical or imaginary power. It is very, very real. Darwin spoke with the most eminent and respected breeders of his time, men who spoke of an animal's body and constitution as something quite plastic, which they can model almost as they please. The great agriculturalist Lord Somerville said of sheep breeders, "It would seem as if they had chalked out upon a wall a form perfect in itself, and then had given it existence." The most important aspect of this selection isn't just picking out one obvious strange new variety when it appears. Its true world-shaping power lies in the slow accumulation of tiny, almost unnoticeable differences over many, many generations. Differences that an uneducated or impatient eye would miss entirely. Not one man in 1,000, Darwin noted, has the precision of eye and the soundness of judgment to become a master breeder. It takes a lifetime of unwavering devotion and perseverance to succeed. But there is another kind of selection, one that is perhaps even more important for our story, because it requires no master's eye. Darwin called it unconscious selection. This happens simply because everyone in every walk of life tries to own and breed from the best individual animals they can find. A country gentleman who keeps pointers isn't trying to create an entirely new breed. He just wants good hunting dogs. So he breeds from his best dogs. And his neighbors, wanting the same, do the same. Continued over centuries, this simple process, carried out by thousands of people unconsciously, slowly, and insensibly, improves and modifies the breed. King Charles's spaniel, the English setter, the powerful English racehorse, all have been unconsciously changed and improved over vast stretches of time. This slow, gradual, and often unrecorded process explains why we often don't even know the wild ancestors of our most common and beloved garden plants. The gardeners of ancient Rome, who cultivated the best, sweetest pears they could find, never dreamed of the splendid juicy fruit we would one day eat. But we owe our modern orchards, in some small degree, to their simple, unconscious choice to save and plant the seeds from the very best fruit. This is the quiet, pervasive power that shapes life under our care. A high degree of natural variability is favorable, as is keeping a large number of individuals, which increases the chance of a useful variation appearing. But most important of all is that the animal or plant is so valued by people that the closest attention is paid to every single individual and every slight improvement. And so, with these thoughts, Darwin lays his careful groundwork. He has shown us that variation is not the exception, but the constant and gentle rule under domestication. He has shown us the immense, almost magical power of man's selection, both the methodical, conscious selection of the master breeder and the slow, unconscious selection of everyday people, to accumulate these small changes over time, creating breeds so different from one another that they look like distinct species. He has given us the key, but now he asks us to take this key and step with him away from the farm, away from the garden, and out into the wild, into nature itself. If life is so plastic, so changeable under our care, what happens out there in the world untouched by human hands? Are the species of the great forests and the deep oceans also subject to the same laws of variation? Do they differ from one another in the same subtle ways? Is there a great overarching force in nature that acts as a selector, just as the breeder does in the pigeon coop? As we close our eyes tonight, we leave the familiar world of domesticated life behind. The questions now grow larger, wider, and more profound. We are heading into the wilderness, into what Darwin calls variation under nature. In our next journey, we will explore the subtle differences between wild individuals, the mysterious, blurry lines between species and varieties, and we will begin to ask what great, silent, and powerful force might be acting as the grand selector in the wild. The stage is set, the principles are in hand, and the greatest story of all is just beginning. Sleep well.